Welcome to the latest installment of the AST Journal Club series. Today's session features an American Journal of Transplantation article on the topic of semi-directed living donors in Israel, sociodemographic profile, religiosity, and social tolerance. This session is sponsored by the AST Psychosocial and Living Donor Communities of Practice. In a moment, I will turn the session over to our moderator, Dr. Gayle Vranic from the Duke University School of Medicine. But before we begin the main presentation, we do have a few housekeeping notes to help you engage with today's webinar. There is currently a viewership polling question displayed for the audience. Please take a moment to answer this question while we finish the remaining announcements. We encourage you to use chat during the Journal Club to share your thoughts and comments. However, if you have a question to submit to our panelists, we recommend using the Q&A button in your Zoom webinar panel. Questions submitted via the chat window during the session may be missed. This Journal Club is being recorded, and the archive will be available on the MyAST website and AST YouTube channel in 2 to 3 business days. Finally, when you log off at the conclusion of today's Journal Club, you will see a link to a short evaluation survey to complete. Please fill out the survey to help us keep our content current and engaging. I will now turn the session over to our moderator, Dr. Vranic, to begin our presentation.
Thank you, Brian. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Journal Club, co-hosted by the Living Donor Community of Practice and the Psychosocial and Ethics Community of Practice. In this session, we will be discussing semi-directed living donors in Israel, sociodemographic profile, religiosity, and social tolerance. Hello, as Brian mentioned, my name is Gayle Vranic, and I'm a transplant nephrologist and director of Living Donor Kidney Transplant at Duke. It is my great pleasure to be moderating this session and to have two great speakers today to discuss this important work. So as I wish good morning to all of our attendees stateside, I would like to wish a very special good evening to our friends across the ocean, including our speaker, Professor Hagai Boas, who is joining us from Tel Aviv. Professor Boas is a prominent medical sociologist and health policy expert with the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute and Ben Gurion University in Israel. His research explores social, ethical, cultural dimensions of organ transplantation, and his work provides critical insights into innovative donation practices, including semi-directed living kidney donation, which will be the focus of our talk today. Professor Boas?
Thank you very much, Dr. Vranic. I'm delighted to be here with you and share some of the findings of our paper, Sociodemographic Profile, Religiosity, and Social Tolerance. I wish also to thank the organizers of the AST for their invitation. Thank you very much. And also to acknowledge and thank my co-authors of this paper, Dr. Eviatar Nesher, who heads the transplantation unit at Rabin Medical Center, and Rachel Michovich, the chief transplant coordinator at the time at this department for their help. This study was sponsored by the National Institute for Health Research and Policy in Israel. So if you'll excuse me, I'll turn off my camera now because I want to read and to be precise as I'm going throughout the slides. So conflict of interest, disclosure. I have no relevant financial relationship to disclose, but I do have something to disclose. 5 years ago, I sat at a dialysis ward in Tel Aviv, waited for my 4th transplantation. I sat there in my dialysis couch, day in, day out, waiting for a donation. Since Israel suffers from a low rate of deceased donations, living donations are the ultimate solution for kidney patients. A non-profit organization called Gift of Life, or Matnat Chaim in Hebrew, fills this gap by recruiting volunteers to step forward and donate one of their kidneys to people they have no prior acquaintance with. These donations are actually the subject of this talk today. As the paper title suggests, they are not non-directed donations, since this organization offers the potential donors to state their preferences regarding the recipient profile. This renders these donations ethically problematic, since the result is that their donation remain bounded within the Jewish population. I remember undergoing dialysis with other patients who come from Jaffa and are not Jewish, struggling with the unbearable thought that the accidental fact for me that I was born a Jew gives me an advantage, an unfair advantage over other patients. It was for me not that different from organ trafficking, and I was conflicted about it. I ended up with a combined transplantation from a deceased donor of the liver and a kidney 5 years ago. But as a trained sociologist, also with a series of publications on the social world of organ donations, and with this book published 2 years ago, I delved into the political world of Matnat Chaim. And as the subtitle of this book suggests, I was interested both academically, but also very, very personally in the questions, where do organs come from? Israel is a very, very interesting case in the world of organ transplantation. It exhibits at least 2 exceptions that render it very interesting. The priority model, in which donor card holders or living organ donors and their family members receive priority in the waiting list. This is a policy that started a few years ago, and it is started in Israel, and it has some imitations around the world, but also very, very controversial. We will not talk about this today. We will talk about the second exceptionalist feature in Israel, which is the high incidence of living donation to strangers. Whereas the incidence of non-directed donations in other countries stands around 5 to 7% of all living donations, in Israel, it surpasses the incidence of family donations, reaching to 60% and more out of all living donations. This is quite unusual. We will see that they are not specifically non-directed living donation as other countries, as other programs in other countries define, but they are close. The aim of our paper is to provide statistical data on those donors and to address issues that stand at the heart of the ethical controversy. Their socio-demographic profile, religiosity, and mostly their social tolerance. The journal editors and reviewers insisted that these donations cannot be accounted as non-directed and suggested conditional. We agree that these are not quite non-directed donations, but conditional, we thought, is too strong a word. We learned that these donors can be also flexible regarding their conditions. They are not very rigid. They have their own limits, but they can be persuaded to donate to other people. In this paper, in this talk actually, I prefer to name these donors as community donors. I think that this captures much better the sociological nature of their donation. So the publication attracted some comments and letters to the journal, to American Journal of Transplantation. The issue itself became very hot in Israel before October 7, and afterwards everything turned upside down. So, but during that summer, the Israeli Medical Association, the ethical committee of the Israeli Medical Association was assembled to discuss the implication of cooperating with this nonprofit organization that actually, in a way, directs donation. Other publications expanded even more on the scope. Expanded the scope more ethically and empirically. We see here another Israeli study about an analytical or ethical analysis of conditional kidney donations, and also a letter to the editor of our discussant later, Dr. Lee-Riddle and colleagues. If I am to introduce the gist of the controversy over community or semi-directed donations, I would say that the dilemma is between an approach that puts equity, equality, and justice at its center, and aims to have all living donation to strangers to fit the ethical categories, and a more utilitarian theory that aims to maximize organ donation in a constant reality of organ shortage. So we have the Good Samaritan theory and the altruistic paradigm insisting on the non-conditional, the same policy as in deceased donation. And we have the more utilitarian approach that actually sees living donation as another, let's say, sociological universe than deceased donation, and a role that requires perhaps another ethical criteria in order to maximize the incidence of living donation, especially in countries that suffer from a low rate of deceased organ donation. We propose in this study a sociological and a context-based approach to this ethical double-bind dilemma. In contrast to other approaches, to ethical or philosophical approaches that understands this dilemma in abstracted manner, we wish to answer or to solve perhaps is also too strong a word, but to understand the dilemma by applying methodologies and theory from the social sciences. This is my background. This is the discipline where I grew up. So the idea is to understand who are those donors? Why are they doing that? What are their motives? What are their opinions? What are their views? And perhaps by understanding this and not to conduct a purely philosophical debate could provide us with insights that help us to frame differently the issue. Before we will delve into the study itself, some background on organ donations in Israel. Socio-historical background about the transplantation law and the Brain Respiratory Death Act. So Israel, as I said, suffers from low rate of deceased donations for years. This is partially for the Jewish opposition, the ultra-Orthodox opposition to the definition of brain death. The Jewish law, halacha, sees death mainly as through an aerobic lens. So neurological criteria to define death poses challenges and problems. After years of deliberations, Israel enacted the Brain Respiratory Death Act. Its name suggests that it is actually a brain death which is combines aerobic and neurological criteria. The act was legislated on March 24th, 2008, on the same day, together with the transplantation law. The transplantation law actually regulated and provided guidance and rules how to procure and how to allocate organs in Israel, and to combat by criminalizing organ trafficking. The hope was that with a rabbinical approval of brain death, the rate of deceased donation will increase to the point of sustaining donation demand. This, however, did not occur, as controversies over brain death still remained and still are actually blocking many Israeli from signing donor cards and from actually donating. But an unintended consequences to the laws was a dramatic rise in living donation. Today, as I said, most of living donations in Israel come from people who have no prior acquaintance with their recipients. This is mainly due to this organization, Matnat Chaim, who came in after the law was enacted and provided, if we can use that word, many donors to the pool of living donors. And actually, without Matnat Chaim, the situation of kidney patients would be very, very grim, with no actual increase in deceased donation. So this actually captures the dilemma that stands before transplant policymakers and Israeli transplant surgeons and nephrologists, what to do to cooperate and to save their patients, or to stick with universal ethical guidelines that prohibit any kind of conditional preference here. So this is the background for the research. So, and let's go now to the methodology. We obtained data on more than 1,200 kidney living donors that underwent operation from 2010 to 2021. We divided them into two groups, community and family. The family donors actually serves as a control group, since it largely represents the general Jewish population. We had few cases of non-Jewish family donors, but it should be said and should be noted here that non-Jewish population in Israel hardly donate to the national pool, both in deceased donation and in living donation. So we have hardly any non-Jewish donors through Matnat Chaim. Some will even say that we don't have it all. We had a respondents rate of 62%, which comes to 749 respondents, 400 of them family and the rest from the community. The questionnaire that we composed included questions on their socio-demographic profile, ethical questions regarding donations, social tolerance towards others, health issues, and religiosity. So let's go now into the actual finding and see what we saw. So gender. The gender gap in family donation actually follows similar findings from other countries, in which within the family, most donors are women. We also conducted a further study in this research with findings that I don't have the time to present, but I'll refer to them shortly. We saw that the most common type of donation within the family is wife to husband, and the most rare type is husband to wife. So this goes on and on. We ask them also about their family relations, but we'll not get into it since our subject matter is the community donors, in which the gender gap actually resembles the gender gap in deceased donation, where men compose the majority of donor. There can be some speculation about why is that so. We know that I'll return to that later on or in the Q&A. We see that the average age of community donors is smaller. They are younger than the family donors, and most of them in both groups are married people. Some of the findings seems perhaps trivial, but they are important in order to discern from the community people, not to confuse them with organ vendors. Statistically, I'll show you later on how they are different in their socio-demographical profile. Okay, so religiosity and education. So here are the findings on religiosity, with actual amazing fact that almost 90% of them reported themselves as observant or highly observant. With the family religiosity level actually reflects the distribution of religiosity among Jewish Israeli population. So you see that community donors, first insight, they are a very distinct group. Everyone who encounters this in Israel knows that they are mostly religious or Haredi, highly observant. Education, okay, so we see that also community donors have almost 80% of tertiary education level, in comparison to 60% of the family. Occupation, so we know that almost all of community donors are employed in some way or another. This, together with the education, also implies that these are not organ vendors who we know that have low level of education. They are mainly single and not married, and they are unemployed. So this is a totally different population. They are not doing it for the money. They are doing it for something else, which we need to find out exactly what. Size of residence or settlement, this is perhaps the most interesting finding that we have. Note that if we combine the donors that live in places where, with lower than 5,000 inhabitants, or between 5,000 to 10,000, these make up more than 50%. They are living in small communities. This actually plays a significant role in how, let's say, now their altruism spreads. There is this American sociologist called Sorokin, who lived in the 50s, who studied pro-social behavior, and he has this theory called contagious altruism, in which he argues that altruism, it could thrive in small communities. It can even become the norm rather than in big cities. I think this is a very important sociological insight that can help us understand what are the actual dynamics that push people towards this very, very unusual altruistic act. Okay, so this is a table presenting a multivariant analysis of the predictors of who is liable or who will be a community donor. So we see that being a woman and being young is being a woman and being not young is has a negative impact, but high education, religiosity, and place of settlement have very strong positive correlations as predictors of community donors. Now we turn to some ethical questions that are very, very interesting. Their findings are very, very interesting. So we ask family donors alone, do you think it is appropriate for a person who has a potential suitable donor within the family to receive a donation from a person outside the family circle? So it's yes and no, pretty 46 to 54% no, 46% yes. it is very important questions because the donors themselves felt used when they learned that the patient had another option within his or her family. And family members wanted to save, quote to quote, their potential donor to a person that might have another transplantation after this one. So this is kind of calculation of donors here, of living donors, which is very, very interesting and has very, very major ethical implications. Today, the Matnat Chaim organization did not suggest community donors to patients that have a possibility for a donation inside their family circle. So this question is very, very relevant to the dynamics implicit in Israel regarding the balance between family and non-family donors. Okay, now we also asked the family members the following question. If a suitable donor was found outside the family, willing to go through surgery for a fee, that means to sell his or her kidney, would you still volunteer to donate? So this is a scale from 1 to 10, and 71% would prefer to undergo a donation and not to be involved in organ trafficking, or not to let his family member to be involved in organ trafficking in one way or another. Perhaps they didn't want to admit, and you know, there's this fallacy in questionnaires that the respondents actually want to satisfy or to provide clean and proper answers. So, but at least this is the reluctance from organ trafficking. We asked the same question with this change. We asked them if a suitable donor was found outside the family willing to go through the surgery altruistically, would you still be willing to donate? And here we see different data. Now we see that they are split into half. Many of them would much prefer a foreign donor than donate themselves without hesitation. Again, these findings are very, very important to the balance between these two modes of organ donations in terms of policy, in terms of how to balance these two, if we are to allow community donors to have a portion out of the living donors. Okay. Oh, what's happening? Sorry. Oh, okay. Do you feel that the kidney recipient is committed to you? Okay, so community is the dark purple, let's say, or brown, and family is the light blue. Not at all, mainly, 1 or 2, but mainly 2. But see that the family is a bit higher. It's not statistically significant, but we can assume that family relations are different than one-time giving to a stranger. About decision making, to what extent was the decision to donate a kidney was an inclusive family decision? My personal decision, 1, and to a very large extent a family decision. This is interesting to see that in the family, it is lower. So many of the family members decide on their own. And I think that perhaps because this involves everyone could be a potential, or at least perhaps more than one. So involving the family by deciding to step forward as a donor might burden the family with tension. Whereas for community donors, they can ask or seek for support from their family. Views on living organ donation and post-donation experiences. again, I'll just go through it. How the donation impacted your own health concerns. Again, the family more, perhaps because they see in front of themselves a kidney recipient with all the health problem, and they see what it means to have kidney problems. Whereas for communal donors, it is a one-time act with no engagement with or continuous engagement with the recipient. How often do you think on your donation? Pretty much the same. And did you feel physical change after the donation? Most of them say not at all. Do you see yourself as a healthy person? To a large extent, both groups, and none of them have regrets. How often do you go to medical checkups, including at nephrologist? Yeah, so again, pretty much the same. Now, the family perceptions. We ask more questions about their perceptions on family. And one of the questions that we found very interesting is, do you consider your close friends as a family? So again, both see friends as close family. And to what extent do you see Israeli society as one big family? So Israel is considered in social sciences as a familial society. That means that a rather small society, which a very, very strong, informal, very familiar bonds between people who do not know them, know each other personally. So you see that the community donors hold this to be very true more than the family, which also are very high, but still more individualistic. The role of religious beliefs in spirituality among donors. How did religious beliefs influence the decision to donate? So again, we saw that most of the community donors are religious or highly observant, and they score high on this question. So here is the rub. Here is the most controversial aspect. Was important, we asked community donors, for you that your recipient have the same religious and national identity as yours? 72.5% answered yes. It is important to donate to the same religious and national identity as yours, meaning Jewish population. But we continued and asked them the following questions. Was it important for you that your recipient have the same level of religiosity as yours? And here's 97%, almost all of them didn't care for that at all. That means that they would donate to me, a total secular Jew, rather than perhaps a religious non-Jew neighbor. This is, in a nutshell, the problem. So regarding this problem, we asked them about social tolerance. There is a scale, a sociological scale that actually it is a scale of social tolerance with questions such as we see here. Would you be willing for you or one of your family members to marry someone from another ethnic group? Here, there is no problem with that. Would you be willing for you or one of your family members to marry someone from another religion? Okay, so this is a very strong Israeli and Jewish taboo to marry between the religions. Not, I must say in this context, before this audience, that this is a very different pattern from Jewish Americans that tend to marry non-Jews. But in Israel, this is a big taboo. Of course, the religious group, which are the community donors, sees that as certainly not, more close to certainly not, than the family. But would you be willing to invite someone from another ethnic group to your home? Here, there is no actual problem. Would you be willing to invite someone from another religion? The score is 8, which is, in my view, quite problematic. I would expect much higher. Would you willing to live in a city with people who belong to another ethnic group? Again, there is no problem with that. Would you be willing to live in a city with people whose religiosity level is different from you? Again, there is a difference with community donors are more conservative and want to live in more religious neighborhoods. Okay, again, these are questions on social tolerance, about living in a city with people who do not share your religion or national identity. We have mixed city in Israel, but as we see, the score is quite low. Also about the religious and business is no problem. So I come to the end of my talk. In the 2 minutes I have left, I want to summarize it in a nutshell. So we have a very strong features of this group. They are religious. They live in small places. Some, I think, mostly in the territories in Judea and Samaria. They are educated. They are doing that altruistically. I think that the problems does not lie with each donor. Each one of them really steps in and have this incredible act of giving, of doing something to the public. When it comes to social tolerance, when it comes to choosing a person that shares your national identity, that is also being a Jew, I think that we need to understand that in terms of solidarity instead of altruism. I have another papers and another, let's say, line of argument that actually takes all these data, frames it as framed community organ donation as an act of solidarity rather than altruistically. But the social tolerance, the last slides I presented, clearly said that these donors are not as much as intolerant towards or tolerant towards other in comparison to the general Israeli population represented by the family donors. So Israeli is a society in which has a deep diversity. It has a very strong and rigid boundaries between Jews and non-Jews, between secular and non-secular, between right and left today more than ever. This is a society which is deeply conflicted between different groups. Is it okay? Is it right to have in such a society such a pattern of community donors, which is actually the majority group, donating to the majority group? This is one of the hardest questions that that policymakers in Israeli has to deal with. So with this, I end my presentation, and I'm delivering the platform to you, Dr. Vranic.
Oh, Professor Boas, thank you so much. That was an excellent review. And I feel I have a better understanding of semi-directed living donation in Israel after your talk. So thank you very much. We are also fortunate today to be joined by a discussant. Dr. Grace Lee-Riddle is a transplant surgeon who comes to us with expertise not just in transplant, but also in biomedical ethics. While she was completing her training at the University of Pennsylvania, she completed both a fellowship in advanced biomedical ethics and obtained a master's of science in medical ethics. Following completion of fellowship training in transplant and hepatobiliary surgery at Columbia and Cornell, she is now an assistant professor of surgery at the Division of Transplantation and Hepatobiliary Surgery at Rutgers. I will now hand it over to Dr. Lee-Riddle to share her perspectives on semi-directed or conditional living donation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vranic. Thank you to the AST for approaching me as a discussant for this very interesting topic. Thank you, Dr. Boas, for sharing so much of your research approach and also your personal stories that, add a whole other dimension to this lived experience of going through semi-directed living donation. Hi, everybody. I'm Grace Lee-Riddle. I'm a transplant surgeon at Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School. And I'm going to be sharing with you some considerations from a letter to the editor that the Psychosocial and Ethics Community of Practice had sent to the American Journal of Transplant, looking at the ethical considerations of conditional directed living donation from a North American perspective. I was previously on the Psychosocial and Ethics Community of Practice Executive Committee as the early career member at large, and it came across our desk that when publications about semi-directed or conditional directed living donation in Israel were being studied, someone posited to us, like, well, what would that look like if we considered adopting it or supporting it as policy in the United States? And so I worked with a task force to consider this topic, and then this is what we had come up with. So happy to share those considerations with you. So breaking it down into a variety of ethical principles and the pros and cons for conditional directed donation, first and foremost, we're going to, of course, have to address autonomy. In the sense of respecting a donor's autonomy, we give donors a significant amount of latitude to direct gifts, whether it is donating their kidney to whoever they want, or donating anything else as charitable contributions. To respect a person's autonomy is to give them that latitude. However, I think one question that we had for conditional directed donation was, how should we be considering gifts that benefit majority groups and that may become exclusionary to minority groups? The example that we gave in our ethical analysis is, if we started to support the idea that people in the US wanted to, donate to scholarships to the Ivy League schools, that sounds great on its face, but then what if the condition was that it was only for the majority group in the US, that it's only to benefit full scholarships for white students? And by nature of having majority groups be the ones that benefit from an autonomous decision, we thought that that adds another dimension that should be considered when we consider respecting an individual's autonomy. And then we also point out that there are multiple scenarios where we restrict donor autonomy already. People with active cancer cannot donate. People who are obese may not be able to donate depending on the transplant center that they approach. People who are at risk of developing end-stage renal disease themselves in the future would be excluded as potential donors for someone that they would love to donate their kidney to. So we raise those issues and considerations. We also discuss the principle of partiality. So there are some moral theories that justify placing greater weight on those with whom you share a special relationship. The degree of closeness that you have, we cannot say that that doesn't matter. And with the principle of partiality, it is understandable why someone would want to donate to someone within a specific social demographic. You have potentially a special relationship with this community. But concerns that we had brought up when evaluating the principle of partiality is that currently, as far as we could tell from the experience in Israel, there are no limits and there's no transparency to this practice. And we would be concerned that if we were to adopt conditional directed donation in the US without a previous example of a system that included limits or transparency, that we would then have potentially that same issue. The other thing is, We did not know how it could be parsed out, whether the condition of partiality is to exclude specific groups as the condition for donation, as opposed to singling out a specific group to donate to in conditional directed donation. And we had a hard time figuring out how you could justify conditional directed donation to a specific group, and not say that you can exclude a certain group as your condition for donation if you're trying to respect that donor's autonomy. Next, we wanted to address equity. And so when we think about equity, we think about ensuring that the disadvantaged are not further disadvantaged. And so we need to focus specifically on these healthcare disparities that exist in living donor kidney transplant. Disparities that affect living donation and transplant outcomes in the US are multifactorial. We know that race, we know that socioeconomic status impact referral for transplant, finding a living donor, and the ultimate transplant outcomes after a transplant, whether it's deceased or living. And we were concerned that conditional directed donation in the US could widen disparities between groups in the United States. We have a very multicultural society. We have a history of social and health inequities that we are still trying to understand, analyze, study, overcome. And would the introduction of something like conditional directed donation widen those disparities and lose some of the ground that we've made in trying to move towards a more equitable state? Last but not least, we wanted to talk about utility. We wanted to address, how would conditional directed donation affect public sentiment in the United States? When I was meeting Professor Boas before and hearing about his research, I was actually surprised to find that even in Israel, this is a controversial concept, and that there is some ambivalence about it, despite the utilitarian good that is coming out of it. Because having just read the literature about it, seemed like people were very in favor of it. And I would be concerned that if in Israel, it's considered still a controversial topic, that if we brought this to the United States, that this could have some chilling effect towards transplant because it could be seen as distasteful. And another question that we had was, what would be the impact of conditional directed donation on altruistic non-directed living donation? And I would love to hear from Dr. Boas what his experience with conditional directed donation is. But from my reading and my understanding, I believe that essentially altruistic non-directed living donation has disappeared in Israel after the strong support or the logistical prominence of conditional directed donation. So in conclusion, conditional directed donation has merit as potential policy. We understand why it is a policy that was pursued and is in effect in Israel. However, we felt that the potential harms of adopting conditional directed donation in the US would outweigh the benefits. We recommended that we stay consistent with deceased donor policy, which is to name an intended recipient or to pursue non-directed altruistic donation, which is also still the policy in Israel for deceased donation. But ultimately, ethical analysis and policy reflects cultural and societal priorities. We got to hear from Professor Boas about the historical context of organ donors in Israel, that they do not have a robust deceased donor network like we do here in the US. And this was an innovation to overcome that. And so, ethical analyses do reflect those things. Ultimately, I think having robust dialogue is key to move towards transparency and to also engage in appropriate stakeholders to continue on with controversial but potentially helpful policies like conditional directed donation. So thank you very much.
Well, Professors Boas and Dr. Lee-Riddle, thank you so much for your thoughtful reviews of this complex and thought-provoking approach to living donation. I have a lot of questions. I know our audience does as well. You can drop those in the Q&A box, but I'll start off by asking Professor Boas to address Dr. Lee-Riddle's previous question about semi-directed living donation. Let's say that in the United States, we adopted semi-directed living donation. What would it look like in 5 years? What are the implications specifically for how people approach living donation, and what would happen to true non-directed living donors?
Well, hard question, but I'll try. I think that some of the challenges, I presented some of the challenges, like the balance between the family and the community donors. Once you have an alternative, the fear is that it will crowd out the family donors, or that or that pure, let's say, altruistic, non-directed donors will vanish. But I don't think this will be the case, because it depends on God is in the small details, as they say. So it depends on the logistics and the institutional regulations that channel these donations, the community donations. If, like in Israel, this will be a way for people who do not have eligible donors within their families, but for people who do, or patients that do have eligible donors in their families, this channel would not be available. This is one solution. As for non-altruistic donors, for non-directed donors, for pure altruistic donors, this is the nature of altruism, actually, that it does not actually, and also in Israel, it's not true that they are vanished. There are still some who come. There is a program in the Israeli National Center of Transplantation for living donations, and they do not have preference clause in their application form. They cannot have, because they are state apparatus and they part of the Ministry of Health, and this would be a violent transgression on equity and equality and access to donations. And they do have these donors. They do have these, not as so much, but I think that these 5% that each country has of non-directed donation, of real altruistic donors, still exists. And I think that even I would add something more, which is more to the Israeli society. I'm not sure about the American society, but the preference, the controversy over the preference clause actually raised such an opposition that some of them wanted to donate unconditionally. So it is very, very tricky. There are very, very unintended consequences, and it has to be proceeded with cautious and with much, much thought, and with a bunch of American sociologists who have a very familiar knowledge of how this could be impacted by polarization processes and so on and so forth.
Thank you, Professor Boas. Grace, we've gotten a comment here from Dr. Fletchner saying that using these community donors for the kidney transplants and having them semi-direct their donation, you were losing the multiplier effect that you get from using paired donor exchange by putting a non-directed donor in. And so you are missing out on getting many more incompatible bears transplanted if you're missing out on using the true non-directed as part of paired donor exchange, and he points out this is all logistics. So I'm actually going to ask a question now that I'm going to steal from Dr. Danovich's excellent editorial on this, if I may. So in an increasingly polarized society, should organ allocation frameworks strive to uphold universal ethical principles, even if doing so risks missing out on opportunities to increase organ donation rates? Or should we adopt a more pragmatic approach that acknowledges that these divisions already exist and instead focuses on maximizing the good we do by maximizing transplants, even if it comes with downsides? So Dr. Lee-Riddle, can I throw that one at you?
Actually, I'd be interested. There's another question that came through the Q&A from Atul Agnihotri that asks, is there a willingness for the community-directed donors in Israel to be part of a kidney exchange chain or swap? that includes non-Jewish patients, but also allows for transplant of a Jewish patient as part of that chain.
Yeah,
I
so I guess
is
this
that
is
a
for me.
is that yeah, I was like, is this something that is occurring through semi-directed donations
Yes,
to Israel?
yes, it is. And also, let me answer both questions because it is the same. It's the same answer. So, this research and other research, which are much more qualitative in their nature, asking the donors themselves about their motivations and how they decided to become such donors. I think that insisting, regulating, and let's say hard measures will not help here. But I think that when you come and say that you will indirectly help someone you wanted by donating to a non-Jew, and this patient brings with him or with her a donor that will help the person that you wanted to help, this is acceptable. Another thing, I think that today, after I think 1400 volunteers that went through this organization of Matanat Chaim, this is a lot in Israeli terms. I think that the organization has gained such a high reputation that it can act towards approaching the volunteers and not just reflecting their wishes, but actually navigating softly their wishes into the wider population. They can use religious and Jewish religious terminology and arguments that are in favor for universal donation. Okay, there is also that in Judaism, in the idea of giving and of altruism and of giving to someone who needs. So I think that the road to embrace this, to embrace both, to eat the cake and leave it whole, that is to not to violate too bluntly ethical principle, is to navigate softly and to adjust the reality into the ethical requirements throughout dialogues and not throughout formal or legal measures.
Okay. I guess my 2 cents, Dr. Vranic, from the questions that were being raised, I think you were asking, what is my opinion on the ethical implications of community-directed donors being a one-for-one, but it seems like they are involved in swaps. And so that was why it wasn't a part of our utility discussion, is we didn't know the answer to that. And if they are arranging swaps that do more than just direct one-to-one transplants, then that's a moot point. But I think that what someone had asked about, can these chains include non-Jewish patients? I would then raise the equity question that we had brought, or the partiality principle that we had brought up, which is, as of now, we don't know of any way that people can direct their donations with an exclusion requirement. And I would want to know how you would operationalize something that prevents exclusions and you're directing just to a specific sociodemographic group, because that is a group that you are trying to support. And I raise that as like a issue that would have to be addressed if we were to consider adopting it somewhere like in the United States.
Well, thank you to both you, Professor Boas, and Dr. Lee-Riddle for an engaging discussion. I also want to again thank the Living Donor Community of Practice and the Psychosocial and Ethics Community of Practice, as well as all the attendees who gathered here today for this discussion. I appreciate the opportunity to review this important work. Brian, I'll hand it back to you now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vranic. AST would like to thank Drs. Boas, Vranic, and Lee-Riddle, as well as AJT, the AST, LDCOP, and PSECOP, and all of our attendees for today's session. Please remember to complete the evaluation survey in Zoom and visit myast.org/education to view our video archives and register for upcoming AST Journal Clubs. Thank you all again for today's excellent session.